Hi, students. This is Professor Koch, obviously. I'm just here to go over the exam that's scheduled for Monday and give you a sense of what to expect. This video is meant to accompany the study guide that I posted yesterday. So first of all, let me go over what's different about the exam. These are unusual times, so this isn't the same kind of exam that I would have normally given. First of all, it's open note. Technically, as I said, it's open book. I can't really stop you from using your books, but I wouldn't encourage you to use your book. I strongly encourage you to have good notes instead, because if you're spending a lot of time looking things up in your book, that's going to be kind of hard. Another thing that's different is that there won't be any identification questions. Oh, I've got a typo there. I'm just going to erase that. There won't be any kind of identification questions or short answer questions. Half of the exam will be multiple choice questions, and they're mostly about plot and characters. They're each worth 2 or 3 points. And frankly, I think they're pretty easy. If you've done the reading, I think you're going to be just fine. There's a longer essay question available, and that is coming later in the study guide. So you're getting that a week in advance, so you can really plan your entire essay, pick what you want to say, pick your supporting details, have a good solid outline, and then when it comes to the exam time, you can just write from your outline if you want to. There's also flexible timing, simply because I know that some of your schedules have gotten complicated. So you don't all have to take it at the same time. And again, open note. So I really encourage you to take notes to help you prepare for this exam. Let's go over some logistics. You're going to have to go to the quiz feature of D2L under assessment, and I want to show that to you just in case you're not familiar with that. Okay, so here we are on our home page. This is the announcement you've already read and the video you've watched, right? And here we go to assessment, where you would normally turn in your assignments. A little further down in the drop down is the quiz feature. There's nothing posted there yet because I'm still editing the quiz and because it's not Monday, but come Monday at 9 a.m., you'll go here and you'll see the quiz available. So that's pretty easy. And as long as I'm here, I'm going to show you where you can find the study guide if you haven't already. This video I'm making will be posted here as well. So you can have all of this information to work from. Okay. So the exam is scheduled to take about 75 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes, just like a normal class, but I'm going to leave it open for 90 minutes in case you want that extra time. It'll open on Monday morning, the day that the exam is scheduled. I'll open it at 9 a.m., but it'll be open for an entire 24 hours. So anywhere in that 24-hour window of time, you can do the exam. Once you open it, though, you have to finish it. You can't pause it and come back later to finish it. So set aside a time when you think that you have about an hour and a half, an hour and 15 minutes uninterrupted to do it. Again, your notes are strongly, strongly encouraged. Prepare for the exam, especially the essay question. And again, I would discourage you from using your books or your texts, because I think you'll be wasting your time looking things up. Instead, you should prepare in advance. That's the better use of your time. I'm just also holding you on your honor in terms of your honesty on this test. I think you guys are all good students, and so these are unusual times. I'm not really going to worry about your integrity here. I know that you're going to do the best that you can under these circumstances, and I also get the sense that most of you are really prepared for this too, so you can go into this confidently. All right, so I've alluded to this before. About half of the exam is multiple choice. There are 22 questions. They'll be randomized. You should answer at least 20. There are 2 or 3 points each. And if you miss 1 or 2, it won't hurt your grade, because I've built in 5 extra points there. Those will function basically as bonus points. If you can answer all of them right, you could earn 5 bonus points on the test. And then 50 points will be dedicated toward the short essay, and there'll be another short 5-point short essay that I'll talk to you about in a minute here. In terms of what's covered, The material covers everything since exam one, so that's material from weeks 5 through 11. And when I say everything, I just mean the stuff that we've discussed. There are some texts on our syllabus that we didn't get to, so that obviously will not be covered in the exam. You could write about it in your essay if you want to, but the multiple choice questions won't cover anything that we didn't get to in our class discussions or our online discussions. So that includes literature from 3 movements: the Reconstruction and Racial Uplift movement, the Harlem Renaissance movement, and the Realism, Naturalism, and Modernism movement. We'll talk about each of those in a minute. I'll review those with you. You should also be able to tell the difference between a sonnet and a poem written in free verse. You probably have this information in your notes from the last time we had a class together, I think, before spring break. The sonnet is covered in the Harlem Renaissance video about halfway through. So you probably remember that a sonnet is a 14-line poem. That's typically a love poem. Those 14 lines are rhyming iambic pentameter, usually. And then, so it's a traditional format, and free verse takes all those traditions about rhyming and meter and kind of throws them out the window. Free verse is a poem that has no regular rhyme scheme and no regular pattern of rhythm either. So know the difference between that. Remember that Langston Hughes and other writers were writing mostly in free verse, whereas Claude McKay and County Cullen wrote sonnets and other kinds of traditional rhyming poetic forms. Harlem Renaissance writers did both. You should also be able to define these 3 movements, which I'm going to review with you right now. First of all, Reconstruction and Racial Uplift. Remember a long time ago when we were reading Mr. Cornelius Johnson, Office Seeker, we were talking about W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and their different visions of racial uplift in the years after slavery. So the goals here of these writers were to instruct and to delight. In terms of instruction, they wanted to document what was going on through their writing. They wanted to correct the historical record that was dominated by white people and bring in what was happening with Black people in addition. But they also wanted to affect people, right? They wanted to shape their attitude. So they wanted to instruct in those ways. They also wanted to delight. They wanted to entertain. They wanted to use art, literature in our class's case, to confirm that Black people were creative and therefore possessed genius. So that is the end of the Civil War period, or the post-Civil War period, up through the early decades of the 1900s. And that takes us into the Harlem Renaissance movement, 1919 to about 1940. A lot of times people will say the 1920s is the primary decade for the Harlem Renaissance. So remember, I want you to think about the Harlem Renaissance as an artistic movement with political goals. First, to protest racism and to call attention to the conditions of living under segregation and white supremacy. And secondly, to affirm the beauty and the dignity of African Americans. This is where we see the writers like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, and a lot of writers that we unfortunately didn't have time to get to, but some really wonderful stuff, particularly poetry being written in this time. And then that brings us to the current period, realism, naturalism, and modernism. Remember, this is 1940 to 1960 or so. And this is the period we've been in our class for the last week. James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry. These writers worked with literary realism. And realism is just what it sounds like, a faithful representation of reality or true-to-life depictions, literature that's real. Naturalism kind of brings all of that realism, but puts a harsher treatment on it. Naturalism kind of focused on environmental determinism. In other words, the way that we're all shaped by our environment, the way that we're affected by harsh living conditions, for example. And then modernism means experimentation, breaking away from old traditions and familiar ways of doing things and experimenting. And a good example of that is the way that Baldwin in his story is constantly moving back between past and present, and the reader has to kind of work to figure out the timeline of the story. More specifically about realism, This period is known for its urban realism, particularly its northern urban sensibility. So think about Hansberry's play set in South Chicago or Baldwin's story set in Harlem. Our book says that writers were documenting the gritty realities of urban living for Black Americans. That's on page 97. And also literature as social protest. So again, those are the three movements that I'd like you to be familiar with. You might get multiple choice questions that ask you to match the definition to the movement. Okay, this is a list of the texts that are covered in the first half of the exam, the multiple choice questions. So you can see that I've taken a lot out of here. For Harper, for example, there were 3 poems that I had you read, but the only one that might be covered in multiple choice is this one. So I tried to scale this back a little bit. All right, the short writing questions. 50% of your test, just over 50, no, 50% of your test grade is this first short writing question, this essay question. I want you to write at least a couple paragraphs on this. It doesn't have to be a complete essay with an intro or a conclusion if you don't want it to be. But this is where you should spend a significant amount of your time since it is worth 50 points. And here's the question. Pick one of the following themes and write at least 2 paragraphs that compare how 2 or 3 authors depict that theme. So the themes are racial discrimination or segregation, urban life, you could narrow that down to a particular aspect of urban life if you'd like, marriage and or the family, or a celebration of Black life and culture. So pick any 2 texts by different authors, and 3 if you want, and compare how one of these themes is addressed in those texts. At least 2 paragraphs, so a paragraph on one and then a paragraph on the other would be a good way to do it. Remember, you can bring your notes, you can plan this, you can outline it, and bring that along with you when you sit down to do the exam. Oh, and there will be one short 5-point writing question that asks you to assess what specific things are going well with the online version of the course and what specific things aren't going as well. So you might just want to think about that as well. Okay. So that's it for my little review video. Make sure you let me know if you have any questions. I can start a review forum on D2L discussions if you think that would be useful to you. I don't have a title here. That's it. Thanks for letting me improvise as I go here a little at the end. I hope you're all doing well. I think you're very prepared for this exam if you've been reading the texts and participating in the discussions. If you feel unprepared, review the texts, review the online discussions on D2L, which I hope that you're doing anyway. I hope you're enjoying Lorraine Hansberry, and I look forward to hearing your insights on discussions. I'll see you later.